Hi, Dr. Kat Vlies here from Central New Mexico Community College. In video C of the lymphatic system, we're going to focus on the lymphoid tissues and the cells that are found in these tissues. When we use the term lymphoid tissue, we're really just referring to reticular connective tissue, with a bunch of lymphoid cells in it. And much of the lymph passes through here. This lymphoid tissue with its cells is going to help fight off infections, and it's going to therefore also fight off cancer cells and prevent the spread of cancer. Now, there are two kinds of lymphoid tissue. We have the kind that is very scattered. It's not very centralized in a particular area, and so this we refer to as the diffuse lymphatic tissue. We find it in pretty much every body organ, but we see it especially in that areolar connective tissue layer of our mucous membranes, and we also find it in the lymphoid organs. Remember, in the mucous membranes, we refer to it as the lamina propria. The mucous membranes are a type of epithelial membrane that is made up of an epithelial tissue with goblet cells. So that includes your simple columnar epithelial tissues, which line the stomach and the small intestine and the large intestine. And we also have a mucous membrane lining our trachea, for instance. So that's your diffuse lymphatic tissue. And then we have lymphoid tissue that tends to be more centralized and create these little nodules or little follicles. So we talk about lymphatic follicles or lymphatic nodules. You'll hear me throw these two terms back and forth. And they typically have a center, a germinal center. And in there, we tend to find a lot of B cells. Remember, these are lymphocytes capable of differentiating further into plasma cells, which in turn can make antibodies, as well as dendritic cells. And dendritic cells are immune cells that are very spiny looking, and they have similar functions as macrophages. So they go through phagocytosis to digest their pathogens. We can sometimes find nodules by themselves, kind of isolated, or more in clumps together in larger organs that belong to the lymphatic system, such as in lymph nodes and the spleen and others, as we'll see here in the next few slides, or even videos, I should say. So in those mucous membranes, we find something called MALT, which stands for mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. Particularly, we find MALT in the digestive tract and the respiratory tract, where we, of course, find simple columnar epithelial tissue, as well as pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelial tissue with goblet cells. But we also find MALT in what is called Peyer's patches, and these we find in a part of the small intestine referred to as the ileum. So these are found in the ileum, which is the distal portion of the small intestine. In other words, where the small intestine turns into the large intestine. As a matter of fact, what we're looking at here, this slide, is a slide of the wall of the ileum, so the distal portion of the small intestine. And these oval-shaped regions here are part of what we refer to as MALT. The appendix will also have MALT, and as we said, parts of the respiratory system, so we will see little lymphoid nodules in the bronchial walls. So let's go over the various lymphoid cells that are found in the lymphoid tissue, starting with the lymphocytes. And remember, we have B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes, with the B lymphocytes being the ones that can further differentiate into plasma cells to make the immunoglobulins that we like to call antibodies, and then the antibodies can immobilize antigens. Let's not forget what an antigen is. An antigen is anything that our body recognizes as not self, not this is not a particle of one of my cells. This is a particle that I don't recognize. It looks foreign. That is what we call an antigen. It can be a little part of a pathogen. It could be a protein of a pathogen that is not recognizable by our own body. It could be the toxins of of what the toxins bacteria produce, parts of viruses, uh, even cancer cells that have become so mutated that they're not recognized as self cells anymore. Our T lymphocytes, on the other hand, are pretty complex cells with multiple functions in the immune system. Um, for this class, we'll just say that they manage immune responses. In addition to that, they can also directly attack and destroy foreign cells. In your microbiology courses and also in pathophysiology, you will probably learn a bit more details about the B and T cells. In addition then to your lymphocytes, we also have the macrophages and the dendritic cells. I've talked about these guys before. And then we have reticular cells, sometimes called reticulocytes, and they're very similar to our fibrocytes or fibroblasts and fibrocytes in that they produce fibers. More specifically, reticulocytes produce reticular fibers, which help form the stroma, in between which our blood cells, white blood cells, sometimes red blood cells, can hang out. And we'll see that on pictures in a future video.